Welcome. It is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel as we try to build this thing up. It is a big one. A massive matchup in the Motor City Thursday Night Football. Green Bay heads to Detroit. If you're a Packers fan, you're hoping it's similar to what you saw last year. Green Bay loses at Lambeau to Detroit early in the season, exacts revenge on a Thursday at Ford Field. Green Bay will have that opportunity again this season against the Lions. Don't want to lose to them at Lambeau, but we saw this script last year. Green Bay hoping that it's a similar script and they can get the win on a Thursday against Dan Campbell's squad. Obviously, I hold some bias here, but I'm looking around the landscape of the Week 14 slate in the National Football League, and I think the best matchup is the one we're getting on Thursday night. Green Bay, Detroit, 11-1, 9-3. You know, you look around at other matchups like Kirk Cousins, Atlanta. Kirk makes his return to Minnesota. It's Falcons, Vikings in Minneapolis at US Bank Stadium on Sunday. But like Atlanta 6-6, they're on a downward spiral. Kirk's coming off a 4-interception game and a loss against the Chargers. Like the NFC South is heating up. The Bucs and the Falcons are both 6-6, but Atlanta currently in first because they beat the Buccaneers both times. But I don't think there's as much juice in Atlanta, Minnesota, even with it being the return of Kirk Cousins compared to what we kind of are hyping up for Detroit, Green Bay. Elsewhere, there's like Seahawks, Cardinals. The only reason you would say that one might be more intriguing is it appears Green Bay, Detroit are both going to be playoff teams. NFC West is probably going to be a one-bid division, and Seattle and Arizona are kind of going punch for punch and shot for shot right now. And then I guess if you wanted to lump in Chargers, Chiefs, maybe, but like Monday Night Football's Bengals, Cowboys, like two teams that are out of it already. So I think the best Week 14 game is the one we're getting on Thursday night with the Packers and the Lions. And you look over the matchup, and it's hard not to go back like a month in time when these two teams butted heads in a rain-soaked field in Green Bay. And the one sort of overarching theme, the takeaway from that one was Green Bay's self-inflicted mistakes, shooting themselves in the foot in a variety of categories over and over again. And so you ask yourselves, can Green Bay clean it up this time? First matchup against Detroit, Packers had 10 penalties, Lions had 5. Jordan Love had the back-breaking interception, the pick six at the end of the half, like right at the end of the half, and it was a backbreaker. Green Bay had 3 bad snaps, 6 drops, a missed field goal. Think about all those errors. 3 bad snaps, and I get weather was an issue, but Detroit had 0 bad snaps. You had 6 drop passes, a missed field goal, a pick six that was hard in any capacity to defend the decision made by Jordan Love on that throw as he was trying to check it down to, was it Josh Jacobs or Emmanuel Wilson, and Kirby Joseph read it like a book and took it back for 6 right at the end of the half. And then the penalties that have plagued Green Bay at times throughout the season, they doubled up the Lions. They had 10 to Detroit's 5. It is hard to beat anyone in the NFL when you lose the turnover battle. You have 2 times as many penalties as the opposition. You have 6 drops. You have bad snap after bad snap. You miss a field goal. It's hard to beat anyone when those numbers are stacked against you in a matchup. It's damn near impossible to beat a team of Detroit's caliber, 11-1, when you have those many mistakes in all those different categories and subcategories. Green Bay, point blank, has to clean it up on Thursday. And I will say in recent weeks, also weather not going to be a factor. They're going to be indoors in the dome. And we'll get to that down the line here in this video. But Green Bay in recent weeks has gotten better in the penalty department. Jordan Love has strung together, back-to-back games now without an interception. And so the turnovers are going down. And it sounds like, okay, well, your quarterback didn't throw an interception back-to-back games. Like, are we really celebrating that? He had thrown an interception in every single start up until a couple weeks ago. So, yes, Jordan Love holding up a goose egg in the interception column is big and critical for the Packers. Penalties are going down. Drops are going down the last couple of weeks. If you look at the numbers, interceptions for Jordan Love, hasn't thrown one in the last 2 games. Did he? Yeah, he had one against Chicago, I believe. I don't think it's been 3 games for him. And so we're seeing Green Bay start to clean up some of the errors that are self-inflicted, that they can clean up. But you have to have that clean slate or damn near close to it against the Lions. You can't, you can't say, hey, we lost the turnover battle again, but it was only 1-0 or 2-1. And hey, we lost the penalty battle, but we weren't doubled up this time. We just had a couple more than the Lions. Like typically, and Green Bay's a good team, but the Lions have shown they're cream of the crop. You just can't have it. You got to go out there and execute. And every team's going to make mistakes, and there's going to be lapses in judgments and in breakdowns on the defensive end, and a couple of head scratchers on offense, right? Like pre-snap penalties have really, really been bad for Green Bay so far this season. And I told you guys last week I was going to look at pre-snap penalties because I'd be shocked if Green Bay wasn't top 3, and I completely forgot to look that up. But I will still stand by it that they have to be top 3 or top 5 because there's been so many of them. You have to clean it up against the Lions. It sounds simple, but with how bad it looked against the Lions the first time around, it is good to see that Green Bay is appearing to turn a corner in many of those departments, primarily the turnovers and the penalties. You can't expect a clean sheet, but it's got to be close to it against Detroit. Like that first matchup, Green Bay outgained Detroit 411 yards to 261. And Green Bay only ran 7 more plays. And it didn't feel particularly close in the second half. Like, you outgain a team 411 and you hold the opposition to 261, you would think you're winning that game, 80% of the time? And it was a game that never felt close. Green Bay got up 3-0 and the Detroit ripped off 24 straight points, and the curtains get pulled down. And the game's over and it's out of reach because Detroit's not going to make the mistakes that Green Bay made the first time around. And they walk out of Lambeau with a 24-14 win. So you have to clean it up on Thursday night. Sounds simple, but there's just so many different tentacles to it for Green Bay. It's not just like one area, but we are seeing them improve and get better at least the last 2 weeks against San Francisco and Miami at home in many of those categories. It is Mitch. I am on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Always appreciate all the support. Final thoughts, Packers, Lions, Ford Field, Thursday Night Football, standalone game. Really feels like the biggest game on the slate, on the docket in the NFL for Week 14. I mentioned Green Bay just needing to clean it up is like a main focal point, but we'd be remiss, and perhaps it was foolish of me to even start this video without bringing up the one big eyesore for the Detroit Lions. It's the injuries, and I don't like to use it as an excuse for my favorite teams. In this case, it's Green Bay playing Detroit. It is like 100% valid. Like, anyone who's just using the throwaway line, like, hey, Detroit's banged up going into this one, like, it has to be said with plenty of emphasis. Like, the Lions are absolutely decimated with injuries heading into this game. It's really bad. On Thursday night, when the Packers take the field against Detroit, here are the players that are guaranteed to be out against the Packers for the Lions. These are players that are already out for Detroit. Aiden Hutchinson, Alex Anzalone, Derek Barnes, Jalen Reeves-Maybin, Khalif Raymond, Melifonu's out, John Kaminsky, Malcolm Rodriguez, Marcus Davenport, Mekhi Wingo, not to mention Taylor Decker, Carlton Davis, Josh Pascal, all on the injury report. I believe Davis was listed as a full participant for the first time on Tuesday's practice report. Decker got a DNP, as did Pascal. Like, they have foggy statuses for this game, but it's hitting the front 7 on the defensive side for Detroit in a major, major way at those first 2 levels on the defensive line and the linebacker core. They are ravaged with injuries. It's legitimate. They're not even on like backups. You know, like a guy like Malcolm Rodriguez was kind of like a special teamer for them a lot this year, and kind of saw like spot start duty when injuries started around. He's now, I believe he's out for the season after suffering an injury against Chicago. Like, we're talking about Detroit not even on backups at some spot. Like, you're going farther down the depth chart. And for Green Bay, they should be licking their chops. And I know Detroit's 11-1 in the lines. I just said what cream of the crop was the line I used. They are absolutely that. Maybe not even in the NFC, but in the entire NFL. But Green Bay, I mean, if there was a spot to get Detroit on the schedule this year, they have not been more injured and more banged up than they will be entering this one on Thursday night. That's just a fact. It's crazy how many guys are already ruled out on injured reserve, season-ending injuries, so on and so forth. And I'll come flat out and say it. I know it's on the road. I know Detroit is a wagon. If we're looking long-term here, and obviously the Packers aren't doing that, but we can, right, as we break things down. If Green Bay can't beat the Lions on Thursday, I don't know how they can mentally clear that hurdle if there's a postseason date down the road. Does that make sense? If Green Bay can't beat this version of the Lions, which is still a really good product, But I'm telling you, the injuries with Detroit are crazy. It's like almost level. How many players did the Packers have on IR the year they won the Super Bowl in 2010 against Pittsburgh? Didn't they have like 15, 16 guys on IR entering the Super Bowl? And then Donald Driver got hurt in the game. Charles Woodson got hurt in the game. He was in a sling. Like, it was crazy. And Green Bay still overcame all of it and all of those injuries and won the Super Bowl in Jerry World against the Steelers. Detroit's entering a territory where you just wonder, they're all bought in. The message that Dan Campbell has preached in their front office led by Brad Holmes, everyone's buying in. And that's very much so showing up in the win-loss department, 11-1. But it does get to a point where you're like, how many bodies we got left here to try to use that we trust? Like, they went out and I saw they picked up Quan Alexander off a practice squad. They signed Jamal Adams, veteran safety, and some Detroit player people on Twitter were like, hey, can they put him at linebacker? Can he play linebacker instead of safety? Like, it's bad. I saw over the weekend Detroit signed like 3 players, all defensive players, I believe, from other teams' practice squads to their active roster, and then went out and also added Jamal Adams. Like, it is, I can't say it enough. This is a spot for Green Bay where, and I know Detroit can win on Thursday. Obviously, they're favored by 3.5. Like, the Packers aren't favored in this matchup. But if you're Green Bay and you see how wounded they are, and you can't beat this version of Detroit, how would you mentally be able to tell yourselves that you're then able to do so in the playoffs? Because if you lose this one, you're not going to win the North. You really don't have a shot, and you don't have a shot at the top seed. So any matchup with the Lions would happen on the road in Detroit again. And so I just don't know mentally if you're not able to beat this version of the Lions. And I'm not one of those people who would stamp it and say, yeah, this is a must-win for the Packers. It's a must-win. Like, I'm not going to do that. But if you can't beat this picture of the Detroit Lions with all these injuries, how would you mentally be able to clear that hurdle in the postseason when you assume at that point they're likely to be more healthy, or at least the guys that they're, poaching off practice squads just this past weekend are going to be more comfortable and set in whatever roles they're assigned for the Lions, offense, defense, special teams, however you crack it up. That's my big thing with the Packers. I know they're underdogs. I know Detroit's a wagon. I know it's on the road. This is a game that you have to beat the Lions so you have that confidence if you meet them down the road in the postseason, because it is a team that is battered with injuries that it's kind of at a point where it's like, how can it get any worse for Detroit in the injury department? And so that, I don't want to say it's a worry. That's one of my big things in this one for Green Bay. If you can't beat them now, how is anyone going to believe in you to beat them in the playoffs? Especially with that front seven defensively. And I mentioned it a little bit, like, secondarily. You want to win the division? Like, you still have a vision of getting the top seed in the NFC. If that's the case, this is a must-win. You can't have Detroit go to 12-1 and you fall to 9-4, and you've now lost to Detroit twice and expect to. It's just not going to happen. Detroit's not going to lose out. You're not going to win out. Like, both of those things aren't going to happen. And so if Green Bay, and I would assume they still think there's a shot at the division. We're 2 games behind. They beat us earlier this year. We can still win the North. We can still vie for that top seed. Then, yes, this is a must-win for the Packers, and they should have that mindset on Thursday. I don't call it that myself, because regardless, this is still a playoff team for the Packers, and they would still have everything in front of them. Like, they're still, unless something catastrophic happens, they're still going to have, a ticket to the dance come January, come postseason time. But this is as vulnerable a Detroit squad as I think you're going to get this year. And it just so happens that it lined up on the schedule with Green Bay playing them. Like, if Chicago wasn't so damn incompetent, the Bears beat the Lions last week. At minimum, it goes to overtime. It was an incredibly slow start for Chicago. Tell me how many times Bear fans have heard that. Detroit, though, kept driving the ball, and then Chicago's defense was bend, don't break. I think they had 3 field goals in the first half and a touchdown. It was like 16-0. And then the Bears started to solve the riddle, and they started to figure it out. Like, at minimum, that game goes to overtime. I thought the Bears should have won it had they had any sort of, brains behind the operation running the show at the controls against Detroit. And there were injuries suffered in that game for the Lions. They're even more banged up going into this one against Green Bay. And on the flip side, it's a Packers team that, yes, you're dealing with injuries. You're probably not going to have Edgerrin Cooper. Who knows about Jair Alexander? Elton Jenkins returned to practice on Tuesday. But Green Bay, health-wise, for the most part, you're in a good spot, right? Especially when you look at what Detroit's going through. And so if you want to win the division, you still have dreams of that top seed. You have to win this one. You're 3.5-point dogs. I get that. I didn't expect Green Bay to be favored, but this is that spot where it's like, man, how much more can that Detroit defense put up with? Like, they signed Zadarius Smith. He's looked okay. You think we give it, like, do I give a rip about Zadarius Smith at this point? No. Like, as far as, like, his impact on the game, like, not really. I trust Green Bay's offensive line more. It'd be a hell of a lot more scary if Aiden Hutchinson was healthy in the lineup, but he's not. And so we'll see how that pans out. It's just, this is a spot for Green Bay where it's like, be the aggressor, force the issue. Mitch, I am on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Always appreciate all the support. Final thoughts, Packers Lions Thursday night in Detroit. One big key in this one, and it sounds simple, and it's kind of just going in line with what we're talking about with these injuries and Detroit and a state of vulnerability that I think the Lions have right now heading into this one. Now, they're not going to be scared. They're not going to be timid facing the Packers or anyone. That's not the Dan Campbell way. But again, the injury report's piling up in a major, major fashion. I think the key in this one for Green Bay, and the numbers will support it, and I'll give you some of those numbers, you have to start fast. If you're the Packers, you absolutely, positively have to start fast. I mentioned they took a lead early against Detroit the first matchup a month ago. They were up 3-0, and then the Lions ripped off 24 straight. It was 24-3 in the third quarter. It was 17-3 at half. It was 10-3. It should have been 10-3 at worst for Green Bay, and then Love had that pick six to safety Kirby Joseph. And even at that point, you're like, Jesus, like the way the offense looked, all the mistakes, the drops, the penalties, the bad snaps, 17-3 might as well have been 31-3 at half in that game against the Lions a month ago. Green Bay has to start fast in this one, and there's really a couple of reasons as to why that is the case. No team in the NFL, nobody in the National Football League has faced the run less than the Detroit Lions. No team sees fewer rush attempts per game against their defense than the Detroit Lions. Why is that? Well, Detroit typically builds a big lead. Look at some of these box scores. Look at some of these game summaries. They start fast. They start ferocious. And it forces the opposition to try to play catch up quickly. And typically when you're doing that, you're throwing the ball a hell of a lot more than you're running it. As a result, no team has seen the run less from the opposition than the Lions. Because they typically build a big lead. They don't rest on it. They don't rest on their laurels. But the opposition is forced to kind of get into scramble mode, into panic mode, and they're looking for a 21-point touchdown when that doesn't exist. The front seven for Detroit defensively is leaking. It is decimated with injuries. Start fast, lean on Josh Jacobs. Don't get conservative. That is not what I'm trying to imply here. Lean on Josh Jacobs like you have in recent weeks. Lean on the run game to set up the passing game like you have in recent weeks. I believe there's a golden opportunity here for Green Bay with its offensive line and what Detroit's going to have to throw out there for its defensive line and even its linebackers for Green Bay to run the ball down the throats of Detroit. And remember, they outgained Detroit by a hefty margin in the first matchup, but it didn't matter because Green Bay kept shooting itself in the foot. You got to keep it clean. Penalties, turnovers. I'm not worried about bad snaps because they're in a dome in this one. The drop passes have been a problem regardless of whether, although it's dipped down for them in a positive way the last couple of weeks. Start fast, lean on Josh Jacobs, force the hand of Jared Goff in this offense. I like Jared Goff. Jared Goff's a good quarterback. But I also know that the Lions average 23 points per game when they have at least one turnover this year. I'll say it again. The Lions average 23 points per game this year when they have at least one turnover. They average 40. In the NFL, the Lions average 40 points per game when they don't turn it over once. When they have 0 turnovers in a game, they're averaging 40 points. Jeff Hafley's group has played a very opportunistic, aggressive style of football when it comes to the takeaway department. It started really, really fast out of the gates, slowed down a little, hopefully picking it back up. Need to get at least one here against the Lions. And I'm not saying just because of what the stats say, 23 points per game to 40. That's part of it. But I really do feel like they build a lead, lean on the run game, trust the run game, trust it against what that front seven is going to be, force the hand of Jared Goff, try to make him uncomfortable, mix up the coverages, try to keep him guessing pre-snap. Because in that first matchup, and it's not Jared Goff's problem, he really didn't have a lot to decipher. Detroit went into that matchup, and you can go back and watch my videos if you want from it. I was so irritated after that game for one big reason. Detroit felt like they didn't have to have their A game against the Packers a month ago because they truly thought, and they were correct, that Green Bay would beat themselves. And they did. For all the reasons I listed, 6 drop passes, 3 bad snaps, a pick 6 before the half, 10 penalties to the Lions, 5, a missed field goal. I mean, you go on and on and on and on and on. Can't have that this time around. Make them the uncomfortable ones by starting fast and getting a lead that's bigger than 3-0. They led 3-0 the first matchup in Detroit. Yeah, that's not... Start up 10-0 and then see what the Lions look like. And then show like, hey, we're up 10-0. We're not going to get conservative, but we like our run game and how it matches up our offensive line against what you've got on your defensive line right now. And let's see how the chips fall. That Green Bay has to start fast in this one. Set the tone, force their hand. That first matchup, Detroit just waited for Green Bay to mess up. They knew Green Bay would mess up, and it did. Over and over, repeatedly. In a variety of ways. And all this talk about Jared Goff being, so stellar indoors compared to outdoors, it's fair, it's valid, it's fine. Numbers support it. What about Jordan Love, though? How about Jordan Love in his last 4 games indoors? 11 touchdowns, 1 interception, a QB rating of 126.3, and oh, by the way, the Packers are 4-0 in those indoor games in Love's last 4. Pretty damn good. Should feel pretty confident about that one. Force Detroit's hand, make Jared Goff uncomfortable, lean on your run game, build an early lead, sustain it. And if you want one way that you could potentially make Jared Goff pretty uncomfortable, and if you would have asked me this in weeks 1 through 12, I would have said I don't see that being a factor, but the last 2 weeks have wildly changed my opinions and my thoughts as much as it should yours. Unleash the hell out of Quay Walker. Quay Walker has looked like a man possessed the last 2 games. I don't know what happened. Maybe you have the answer. I don't. He has looked like not just a little different. Quay Walker has looked like a completely different football player the last 2 weeks for the Green Bay Packers. On Thanksgiving night against the Miami Dolphins, Quay Walker was sent to blitz 5 times. He recorded himself a quarterback pressure on 4 of those 5 instances. Quay Walker blitzed 5 times against Miami on Thanksgiving night, registered a quarterback pressure of Tua Tagovailoa on 4 of those 5. I hope it's a permanent, the light is going on, the light bulb's going on, that they are flipping the switch. Because it's been magnificent watching Quay Walker play football the last weeks. Looks like he's thinking less. And looks like he's just going out and doing it. That's what they need. You want to point at someone that I want to see it again this week in a really, really big spot, in a really, really big matchup. Not that the San Francisco and Miami games weren't that. Let's see Quay Walker step up to the plate again and deliver. Make Jared Goff uncomfortable. Send Quay Walker on more blitzes. 4 quarterback pressures on 5 of those situations where Quay Walker was unleashed and got to cut it loose on a blitz. Pretty good percentages. Build a lead. Sustain it. Get the win. This is a big spot for Green Bay. Mentally, too. I'm telling you, the mental warfare is huge in sports. I mean, you guys all know that, guys and gals. If you can't beat this version of Detroit, how the hell are you going to tell yourselves mentally you can beat them when they're going to be more healthy in the playoffs, and you're already at that point, you'd be 0-2 against them. Positive thoughts going into it, though. If I have to eat my own words on this one, that's fine. You guys know I don't make predictions. I genuinely think Green Bay wins this game on Thursday. I think they're finding their groove, similar to last year, but not quite to that that degree. Like, they were firing on all cylinders offensively last year in the second half. It was poetry in motion. I think they're ascending towards that, but they're not quite there yet. This is a big spot for it. And while Detroit is a wagon, and you can make a case for the best team in the NFL, where they're at right now is as vulnerable as they've been all season. I truly think Green Bay wins this game. And I haven't said that about any game this year. I haven't said I think Green Bay's going to win. I think Green Bay's going to lose. I think they win this one on Thursday night. I feel good about it, where both these teams are. And it's not to suggest that Detroit's on a downhill trajectory. I just think Green Bay's getting them at a good time. They've cleaned up a lot of these mistakes, penalties, turnovers in the last couple of weeks. And they did it outdoors in both those weeks. And non-ideal weather conditions against the 49ers and Dolphins. I look at Jordan Love's numbers indoors. In his last 4 outings, 11 touchdowns, 1 interception. The Packers are 4-0, a quarterback rating of 126.3. I think Green Bay gets this one on Thursday night. We'll have to see. We'll have post-game thoughts. Appreciate all the support as always. Please, please, please click the subscribe button. It is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. We'll see you next time.